Hello my friends, today I want to talk to you about socialism. And some of you are probably thinking, oh great, he's going to tell us that we're going to become socialistic because Obama got elected. Well, no, that's not exactly where I'm going with this. The reason I'm doing this video is because I've seen and even talked to some people, uh, you know, here on YouTube and elsewhere. And I've heard people making the suggestion that the Bible teaches socialism. So, that kind of caught my attention, and I wanted to address that. First, though, I want to consider why is the issue of socialism a legitimate issue to be discussing. Okay, the election's over, we don't really need to deal with all this kind of stuff anymore, except that to consider where our country might be going. And the thought that our country might be headed in a socialistic direction is not purely the result of Barack Obama's election as president. It certainly could be a contributing factor given his policies of wealth redistribution, but it is not the sole or main concern necessarily. One of the big things that has me really concerned is all these bailouts that we're in the process of doing. As we do this, the government is becoming more and more invested in private business, which is something it really should not be doing. I mean, because that's not capitalism. In capitalism, if a business fails, it needs to be allowed to fail. That's the way it works. But, we passed this $700 billion bailout bill, supposedly for the financial industry. Though, at this point, who knows where it's really going, because nobody seems to quite be so sure of where it's going or what it's accomplishing. All we really know is it's tagging our children with a horrendous debt. But now we have the auto companies coming out and wanting their piece of the pie. They've already gotten some and they want more. And the Democrats want to give it to them. Well, why did the Democrats want to give it to them? A big reason the Democrats want to protect the survivability of the auto industry in its current form is because the auto workers are union workers and they work under union contracts. And the Democratic Party has a vested interest in protecting those union contracts. Because if those are allowed to fail, it could be seen that the union contracts were detrimental to these businesses. In reality, the union contracts really are detrimental to these businesses. That's just a fact. The foreign automakers fare significantly better than the U.S. automakers do because they don't have to deal with these union contracts. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, if we allowed these automakers to go bankrupt, it would not necessarily mean that they would go belly up, and it would not necessarily mean that all the people working for the automakers would lose their jobs. What it would mean would be that these companies would have to reorganize and renegotiate everything. And that would include union contracts. And, they'd have to renegotiate and reorganize everything to be able to function with what they actually have to work with. This is what would happen if we don't bail them out. If we do bail them out, then once again we have the government taking a vested interest in yet another form of private business. And the thing you have to follow as this goes along is that the more and more the government does this, the more and more the government takes an ownership in private business. See how that slowly but surely begins to creep into socialism, because that's what happens in socialism, is that the government takes ownership of business essentially, and the wealth derived from that business is distributed among the people, supposedly equally, but it's distributed as the government sees fit. And, as we seek to do more and more of these bailouts, we are on a very slippery slope heading into certainly a type of at least quasi-socialism here. And when you compound that with, the election of Barack Obama and the fact that he wants to do more wealth redistribution, you got another element of socialism there too. So there's definitely a significant socialistic threat at our door that we need to be aware of. So, but then you have the real point of this video, and I'm finally going to get to it, is, people saying, well, this isn't so bad because the Bible teaches socialism. They'll point out how Jesus talked about how important it is to take care of the poor, which is true, he did. And they'll talk about how in the book of Acts, how it tells about how the early church, the people in the early church, they sold all that they had and they used their possessions to share with one another and make sure that everybody's needs were met and nobody was left in want. Well, that's all well and good, and those are good points, but let me tell you why they don't point to socialism. Because socialism is a form of government, okay? And Jesus never taught about us trying to form governments, and Jesus never taught about how governments should function. Jesus told us that we need to care for the poor, and we do. In fact, here's a little thing that many of you may not be aware of. Republicans, statistically, give more to charities than do Democrats when it comes to their own personal income. You may find that hard to believe, but it's statistically true. Even so, Democrats tend to be seen as the party who cares about the poor, the party who's generous toward the poor. But the reality of that situation is that only applies when they're taking somebody else's money and giving it to the poor. It doesn't apply when they're taking their own personal money. So that's kind of an important thing to be aware of and keep in mind. And this applies to what the Bible actually says, because the Bible, Jesus wants you to take care of the poor. He wants you to consider your own income and make sure that the poor are cared for. The early church in the book of Acts, if you take a look at it, they didn't form a government and start taking people's money and redistributing it to the poor. No, the people voluntarily sold what they had and divvied up the wealth that they had to make sure everybody got taken care of. And who was being taken care of? It was the people of the Christian community. They were making sure the people of the Christian community were taken care of. They were doing this of their own personal sacrifice. Out of the goodness of their hearts, they were sacrificing their own wealth, giving it up to make sure that other people were cared for. It was a personal thing. It was not socialism. Not in any way, shape, or form. It was a personal philosophy that they applied to their lives personally. The same thing that obviously Republicans are doing today, because more of them are giving more to charity than are the Democrats. So, we should bear that in mind. And let's also balance what Scripture says with Scripture. Let's consider some other things that Scripture has to say, because one of the primary problems that Republicans and conservatives have with these wealth distribution ideas is that it's so easily abused, okay? There's so much potential for people who just don't want to work and don't want to pull their own weight to take advantage of these, welfare programs and such. So, I have no problem whatsoever with helping people who really need help and who are stuck in a jam, and offering some kind of safety net for people who really want to work and be productive members of society who contribute, where and whenever they can, to making everything work. But when people just want to sit back and let the government take care of them, that's a whole nother deal. And the Bible, too, has something to say about that. Let's take a look. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 11 says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathered its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man." Proverbs 13, verse 4, "The sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied." Proverbs 21, verses 25 and 26, "The sluggard's cravings will be the death of him, because his hands refuse to work. All day long he craves for more, but the righteous give without sparing." 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, "Surely you remember, brothers, our toil and hardships. We work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you." 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." That is the balance. When we look at the scriptures, we've got to take it as a whole and look at the balance and interpret scripture with scripture. When we do that, we gain an understanding far greater than when we zero in on one verse that agrees with our own philosophy and say, see, the Bible teaches what I think. You better know the whole Bible so you know what you're really talking about. Yes, we need to love and care for the poor and help those people who are really stuck in a jam and really need help. We need to be there for those people. But we also need to not create a dependency class of society. The Bible clearly teaches against that. So let's consider the balance, and let's go out there and do what's right. Take care.